Is it yours?
Okay, I think we're good this time.
Nice.
Sorry if anyone was listening online and just heard
She did it on purpose.
infinite maniacal laughter. All right, so thanks everyone for coming to Boston Ember. Woo! It's been a while since we had one of these, so thanks for making the trek out. We have popsicles, we have so much pizza, and we have raffle prizes tonight. And it's not just conference swag this time. I brought something else. And not just popsicles either. Wow. Everyone gets a popsicle. Go in for that.
You get a popsicle.
So our next meetup is going to be August 15th. The topic is not yet announced, but we may have a special guest in town for that talk. So stay tuned for more details. This one is a Thursday night, which is weird for us. I don't think we've done Thursday in a while. So
Used to be Thursdays. Gets me out of garbage duty.
it used to be. I thought you told me you didn't want it. Okay. All right. So for tonight, we have a couple announcements. Then we're gonna have a talk about FastBoot by
Ron.
Oh, okay, by Ron, and a couple, like a little bit of Q&A about the Octane preview. If anyone has questions, I kind of want to just open up the floor since we're all here together, and there's some people who know things about it in the room, and maybe they would entertain us with some Q&A. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see that too.
Don't ask.
And then we'll do the raffle at the end. So we do have a code of conduct. You can find it here at Ember.js.com/guidelines. We follow the same as the rest of the Ember organization. And if you have a problem, a question, or a concern, you can reach me and the other organizers at Ember.js.com. If you have a problem in the broader Ember.js community, there's also the Ombudsman email as well that you can reach out to. Ember Camp Chicago just announced that their tickets went on sale. Flights to Chicago are much cheaper than flights to Amsterdam, especially from Boston. So the CFP closes on June 30th. If anyone is thinking about submitting a talk and wants feedback, there are lots of people in this room who would be happy to help you out. So just let us know. As I mentioned, it's not Amsterdam. Last year was Amsterdam. Emberfest is coming up as well. It's in October in Copenhagen, and their call for proposals closes August 1st. I'd like to thank our host Salsify tonight for the pizza and the space and the moral support. Does anyone from Salsify want to say a couple words about? Oh, you all raised your hand. That was exciting. Go around the circle one at a time.
I thought you were asking to raise your hand if you're from Salsify.
Oh, no. I was wanted to say something about Salsify, if y'all are hiring. I don't know.
Yes, we are hiring. Yeah, we're hiring engineers at all levels across a bunch of different teams. So if you're interested, talk to the Salsify people about that, and we will absolutely talk to you about here.
Cool.
We use Ember. Some of it's weird. Ron's going to talk about that.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to pass it back over to Ron for using FastBoot in weird ways. Can we get a round of applause?
Yeah. Party. All right. So I'm 0x8080A. Some of you may know me as Ron in real life. That's not who I am, though. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about FastBoot today. So let's see. A little about me. Here's the pronunciation.
Oh.
If anyone
Can you say it?
wanted to know, yeah, it's 0x8080A.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you just pronounce it?
You could pronounce it if you.
I used to say it Oxadada.
You can say that too, yeah. Or you can say 711-386.
I can't remember that.
I say ah da 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 da.
Yeah. That works too.
Yeah.
So I work here at Salsify. I'm a software engineer. You can find me everywhere on the internet, Twitter, GitHub. With that, my internet home is ox80ada.pub. I've been using Ember for 3 years, and prior to working here, I worked with Susie at Cinch Financial, which exploded last year. So for this talk, hecklers are welcome. So if you guys want to heckle me, you're more than welcome.
That's stupid.
So yeah, we'll see how that goes. So tonight, we're going to review web architectures. I'll introduce Ember FastBoot. I'll introduce our use case here at Salsify. We'll do a fast guide to FastBoot, where I'll give like a kind of high-level introduction of how to use it. And at the end, we'll do questions and resources. So for the review of web architectures, this is your kind of traditional web application architecture. So you have some sort of server on the back end, whether it's Rails, Spring, PHP. So let's say it's like hosted in your closet or hosted on AWS or something. And these frameworks just spit out HTML to the browser, old school style. And that's all they do. And you have some JavaScript that you kind of ad hoc sprinkle onto the page with jQuery. Maybe you got fancy and did like mustache templates and maybe some backbone. And that kind of age is sort of past. So after that, we moved generally as a community to single page web application architecture, or SPAs. So here you still have some sort of backend API, whether it's Spring, Rails, or PHP. And you have some sort of framework on the front end, whether it's Angular or React, or in our case, we're interested in Ember. So a lot of times, all your HTML is just an empty shell. So you have like a document head, you have an empty body, and the JavaScript does all the rendering of your application. A lot of times, the front end side, the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript is served from a CDN. And then it makes requests to a backend that just serves up an API. So now the new hotness is the server-side rendering and single page application architecture on the front. So here you still have this essentially the same architecture, but you introduce a new server that renders actual full HTML pages to the browser. So every request you make, not every, but the most important part is that the initial request the browser makes returns an entire HTML document that can be rendered without any JavaScript whatsoever. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So in Emberland, the way we can do that is with Ember FastBoot.
How fast is this boot?
It's pretty fast.
Does it come in pairs?
Pairs?
Pairs of boots.
Yeah.
Oh,
Are they winterized?
You only need one. It's that fast.
That was a good heckle.
Do they come in big sizes?
You only need one.
Yeah,
it's so
it
fast.
comes in many different sizes, but it only comes in pairs of pairs. And I think by default there's 8 shoes, so 4 pairs, and that's because the node process kicks up multiple processes. So does that make sense?
It's a set for each of your horses.
What?
It's a set for each of your horses.
Okay.
Horse boots.
So that's the website. What is Ember FastBoot? So some of you may ask, what is Ember FastBoot?
Ron, what's Ember FastBoot?
So that's what we're going to talk about today, actually. So do you need to do server-side rendering? Well, I have the solution for you. So Ember FastBoot is an add-on that you install, and it just does server-side rendering. So it kicks up a node, kicks up a server running on Node and Express, and it brings one aspect of progressive enhancement to your Ember app. So has everyone heard of progressive enhancement? Has anyone not heard of progressive enhancement?
Please explain.
All right. So Devers, he's a noob. He doesn't really know much. So what progressive enhancement is kind of an old term that came back from the older days of the internet, where you want to progressively enhance your browser experience. So you deliver kind of the latest and greatest features, CSS, JavaScript, and the browser in theory should just render it to the best of its capabilities. But if it can't render it for some reason, or if it doesn't support the latest JavaScript, or it doesn't support Flexbox or grid layouts, it'll fall back to a sane default or the next level back. So maybe it'll fall back to like a float position CSS. So basically, you want to deliver the best experience to the browsers that are capable of rendering it, but have sort of a fallback strategy. So here, the idea is that you're just delivering real HTML pages to a browser. It can view the page without JavaScript. There's a few reasons you're going to want to do that. So why would you want to do server-side rendering? One big reason is it improves search index and crawlability. Some of the search crawlers, like Google's bot and Bing's bot, they may turn off JavaScript or check if JavaScript is on the page, and they may try re-rendering the page without JavaScript to see if there's a difference there. And they run a lot of heuristics to determine what the experience is like without JavaScript. Obviously, if you're on a really bad internet connection, whether you're on Wi-Fi, or you're in a country that's really far away with a slow internet connection, or you're at home at a remote location, you have bad internet, if you can get HTML delivered down the line as fast as possible without JavaScript, then that user is going to be able to read something or interact in some meaningful way. So if you're delivering raw HTML, they're going to be rendering something, and that first render is really important. So you do get some performance improvements and faster load times. If you do server-side rendering, that kind of enables all the standard caching strategies of the web. So you can put a CDN in front of it, and that kind of comes free out of the box. And your web page can work without JavaScript or where JavaScript is restricted. So me, for example, I'm kind of privacy and security oriented. So I use this browser extension called NoScript. So anytime I go to any web page I haven't been before, all JavaScript is disabled by default until I selectively enable it. So I view a lot of the web without JavaScript. And any single page web app that doesn't take progressive enhancement into account just doesn't work. So you want to heckle me?
I think I heckled you enough by my presence.
Bring it on. All right, so if people have questions, just like heckle me or raise your hand if you want to be polite. So I was going to introduce our use case for how we use FastBoot here at Salsify. So I mentioned that FastBoot in delivering full HTML pages is useful where JavaScript may be restricted. So that's definitely a situation that we find ourselves in here at Salsify. So we have a product called Salsify Enhanced Content, where we deliver content to a wide variety of online retailers. So if you've been to like Amazon.com or Walmart.com, usually have like, on Amazon you have the product page. And this is horrible. You have a few pictures, a little gallery. You have the buy box, some like product description stuff, usually customer reviews at some point, and then somewhere down here you have content from the manufacturer. So that's also called below the fold content. And we can provide that information for all of our clients. So a lot of our clients are people like Barilla Pasta, Chico Greco, which is like the baby company. And then there's like CKRT, they make knives and stuff. So they will deliver a lot of content to us, and we have a content management system that ingests all that. And then we can syndicate that out to all these online retailers like Walmart, BJ's, and Amazon. So most of this content that's the below the fold content is art-directed imagery and HTML. It's mostly static HTML. It's mostly implemented in an iframe of some sort. And most of these iframes are injected onto the page with third-party JavaScript. So for us, in trying to build this feature, which I'll get more into, we had a few constraints to consider. We wanted to serve static HTML. In this way, we could get all the benefits of serving this from a CDN to reduce our hosting costs. We wanted it to be heavily cached. We wanted to use Ember because we already had a big portion of this app built that was being rendered in Ember. And our team is very efficient with Ember. And we asked ourselves, so what would work within these constraints? And FastBoot was a pretty quick answer. So it's really small because the page is super tall, but here's an example of the Amazon page. I'll open that. So this is the Chico NextFit Zip Max convertible car seat. So this probably looks pretty familiar. But this area down here, this from the manufacturer section, this is what we call the below the fold content or the enhanced content. And this content is supplied by us. Walmart.com also has a similar feature. Walmart is pretty hesitant to using any third-party JavaScript. Amazon doesn't allow third-party JavaScript at all. Walmart wanted to host the content themselves. So what they do is we deliver the content to them through an API, and then they inject it directly into an iframe. And they sanitize some of our markup, and they strip all JavaScript out for any of these third-party providers. This is the Walmart page. Also, it's really small, but you can see down here, this is the content we provide to them for the same product. The BJs.com, they review third-party JavaScript. We basically kind of hook into one of their JavaScript libraries we have on the page, and we inject our content as loaded into an iframe. That's right on the page. So here's what the BJ's page looks like. And these are like a playground. What's the company called? Gorilla?
Backyard.
Yeah, Backyard Play Nation. They make like big play sets. And we inject the red area, all that content directly onto the page. So for you to go onto this page and invest, actually, let's just do that. Because I'm in a browser, it makes it easy to browse around. So you can actually see it pop in, but this page is rendered in Ember. Now, although there's no JavaScript on that portion of the page, you can kind of tell because you have all these little Ember divs, and that's really small, but you have like your Ember view classes and all that kind of good stuff. So it's just an Ember app rendered in FastBoot. So this is what the client of our web application looks like. So just kind of a quick overview. So let's say you're this headphones company. You have hundreds of different headphones that you offer. So you curate a list of headphones. They may have similar features. And then you can click through them individually and supply static text or static images on a one-to-one basis. But the real power comes when you say, for this text, this is going to be bound to a data property called product description. And they all have the same product description bound data. And that way, for this layout, you can basically get the same layout and the same content for a wide variety of products. So if they're in the same category, sometimes that makes managing hundreds of products a lot easier. So this is kind of what we call a composer view, where you can input text and images and bind it to a template. Then you can publish it. When you publish it, it'll basically go out to any of the retailers that you've configured your platform to be published to. So right now we could go to a wide variety of different retailers, but mostly like these days it's like BJ's, Walmart, Amazon. And then we have a network of other online retailers. So when they publish, they basically have a bunch of inputs and outputs. So the client, which I just showed, the user binds data to a template. They input copy in images. And the output of that is a UI configuration with the content and the data bound for a list of products. So they're really editing this content on a list of multiple products at a time. This then goes as input to an API server, which fetches the product data. It runs on Ruby on Rails. And the output of this is rendered HTML that's saved on Amazon S3. So the API server fetches a lot of product data, takes a template and the data bound that the client put together, sends it to the FastBoot server, the SSR server. And when that comes back with the rendered HTML, that's what it's saved. I have a sequence diagram. Actually skip ahead to the sequence of events. So basically, when they're in the composer view, they save the layout and they do a publish. Data, template, and the data bindings goes to our API, which then sends that data along to Ember FastBoot. FastBoot then renders it through the magic of another Ember add-on that we built called Ember Explain. And that binds template configuration with data, renders it in Ember components, and then that gets rendered to FastBoot to an HTML file. That comes back to our API, which then takes that static HTML and saves it to Amazon S3. So now you have hundreds of products saved on Amazon S3. And when the user comes and they visit something like DJs.com, they go to the product page for, let's say, this Gorilla playset, which has an iframe. They get the product detail page, and then that product detail page also loads our iframe. Iframe goes over to Amazon S3 and it renders the FastBoot page. That's where they get the template. So this is an example of some of the data that we send. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. This is a really simple example of some of the Exclaim data that we send down to FastBoot. It's a really simple layout that has kind of a layout, generic layout component that just has your name, provides a variable, where that gets bound to an input item. And we combine that with greeting text and I'm going to show that in a little bit. But that's just a really simple, trivial example of binding data to a Exclaim template. So here's a real production example of Exclaim data for a very complex layout, bound to very complex data. I'm not going to get into this, but it's a lot more complicated. And I'll show a quick demo. So that simple example of Exclaim JSON, I'm going to send a request to our staging server, which is running FastBoot. And I'm going to do an HTTP post request to this FastBoot server. And I'm going to send a content type of application JSON. And I'm going to send the body is going to be that simple or relatively simple Exclaim JSON configuration. So if I make this request.
Do you get more money for every $sign in the template?
You do, yeah. More money, more dollars. So here we have the HTML that comes back to us. It's just a basic static HTML page, has a style tag for all of our CSS, and then it's just, Ember HTML. And then it has a tracking snippet at the bottom. That's the HTML. Here's what it looks like. It's very simple. It's just hello, and it's bound to a data in an input. So if you want to see a more complex example, it's more real world. Here's that same massive body of template and bound data. So if we make this request, goes off, hits Ember FastBoot, we get the result back, and we get this nice static web page. So this, in the real world, our API would make this request, and this HTML would be saved up to Amazon S3. Or in certain cases like Walmart, we would post it to their API. So that's how we're using FastBoot. It's kind of an interesting, strange, and why I call it weird use case, is that this server just exists as a service on our internal network in production and staging. So the users never actually hit this FastBoot server. They just see the output of it from Amazon S3, and they get all the CDN and caching benefits of that. So really, it's just a service for our API. So to get into FastBoot, I would say the best way to do it is start a new project. You install Ember CLI FastBoot, and then you'll add the FastBoot app server. You can actually put an app with Ember CLI FastBoot into production, just running FastBoot out of the box that way. But there's another add-on called the FastBoot app server, and this one is optimized for production because it's multi-process, so that you get a lot of benefits, performance for that, obviously. And then you have to write a little server.js file that invokes your Ember app. So I'm going to show that. But the gist of it is just running node server.js. It runs. So this is a production-inspired code of our FastBoot app server. But if you've ever written any Express code before, it should look pretty familiar. This is how you invoke the FastBoot app server. So this is kind of a wrapper for Express. And this looks for your dist folder, which is the output of the Ember build process. Then you have a before middleware hook, which is part of Express. And you basically say, check for a request called render, and then create a new FastBoot app server, and then navigate to the render route. And then you pass in the request and the response. And that will get you back the response, which has your static HTML in it. And then basically all we do is we read the result, and we get the DOM contents out, and that pulls out the actual HTML. And then we add that to the response, and that's it. One fun little trick that I found was anytime you have an exception, we log it, and then you actually kill the process at that point, which is kind of interesting. Like, why would you want to do that? But if, let's say for some reason, you have an Ember component that isn't rendered or something blows up inside the Ember app, if you actually kill log the error and you kill the process, then the FastBoot app server will actually restart the process for you, and will actually garbage collect a lot of that memory. Whereas if you just left it hanging, we were seeing some memory leaks. So this kind of like kills it and then kills it dead, and then starts its new life.
So you have another process monitoring the node process that reruns it, like NodeMon or something else?
So the FastBoot app server actually does that for you. Maybe?
I don't. So the
Yeah.
FastBoot
I
app
haven't
server
seen this.
totally launches child processes, and it will relaunch those. But if the
relaunch.
server process itself dies, it's dead.
It's
So you've got to have something like PM2 or NodeMon or some other thing that's running.
So we just
boots it
launched
in the-
Node, and when the FastBoot app server spawns off subsequent processes,
Mhm.
and those die, FastBoot app server will restart them. Maybe we should connect afterwards.
Kubernetes, and it will make a number of.
Right. That's what I was assuming is actually restarting the process.
Yeah, actually, I think that's right.
Right. So the child process is totally, you're right, but I think the main server process is probably like some outside, like the containers restarting or the
Yeah, it's
something.
probably the container restarting. Okay, that makes more sense.
Sorry.
No, that's what I wanted.
You did ask for it.
Oh, I totally asked for it. So a few gotchas. It's nice to use the FastBoot app server in production. It's really optimized for that, and it's multi-process, which is huge. One thing really strongly that I got to get across is that you now have your application running in 2 runtimes, the browser, which it's always running, but your application is now running on a server as well. So if it's running on a server, that means you don't have jQuery, you don't have access to the document, document query selector, document cookie, document selectors, none of that stuff. You don't have local storage. You don't have any of these DOM APIs that you have in the browser. So that means you now probably have to write some conditional code in your app to handle situations where it's running on the server and it doesn't have access to this. So, for example, if your app expects to have a session token in local storage, well, you can't get that on the server. So you're going to have conditional logic to check in a cookie, or you're going to have to switch them to cookies. And if you have branching logic, you have new tests that you have to write as well. So another big part of that is now you have a new runtime that you really need to write tests for. So this is where Ember CLI FastBoot testing comes into play. So these hook into the Ember test process. So to run all your acceptance tests like usual, your integration tests, your unit tests. Then it'll also spin up the FastBoot server, and it'll run new specific tests that you write for FastBoot as well. So I think that is almost essential if you're going to run FastBoot. You have to use Ember CLI FastBoot testing. Another gotcha is that you need to whitelist your server dependencies in package.json in the dependencies block. So most of your Ember apps, they have everything or mostly everything in dev dependencies. But anything that you're going to be accessing as an NPM package in the FastBoot app server, you need to declare as a dependency, because FastBoot will look in the dependencies block and add those to its own package.json because it has its own runtime. Sure.
Can you give an example of how would you know if a dependency is something that needs to be available in the FastBoot environment?
So if you have an import statements that, like for example, we use Bugsnag, and you have to add that as a dependency, and in your FastBoot app server, you do import, whatever from Bugsnag in the FastBoot app server. That needs to be in the dependencies block because you depend on it.
So basically anything you import in your JavaScript that isn't Ember.
Anything you import in the server.js file.
In the server.js.
Or anything that they import.
Got it.
Also, FastBoot provides a FastBoot.require that if in your Ember app you also need to require things, not in the server part, but in the Ember app, you can use FastBoot.require, and those also have to be in dependencies.
Okay. Thank you.
I found it really useful to use Docker to deploy and host the FastBoot app server. It made it a lot easier than trying to manage it yourself, but that's because I really like Docker. So the biggest takeaway I would say is be aware of security vulnerabilities you never had to consider before. Because when you write Ember apps, these are apps that run in the browser, but they run on your users' computers. But now you're running Ember inside your own computer in your own data center, and it's in a very privileged environment. You have to be aware of what's going on. What packages are you depending on? What kind of environment variables are exposed? What does the server have access to? What kind of data are you taking as input from users that is now going to be running inside of your VPC? So it's a whole new world of security that you just can't willy-nilly just say, oh, we're going to make our Ember app into a server app, and just oh, it works, let's just run with it. There's a lot of security implications involved there, so you need to think through those pretty deeply. So, does anyone have questions about that in particular? So thanks. This is my team. Romina's right there, so you can heckle her. Me and her worked on this very closely. Dan Freeman's right there.
Not expecting to be on this list.
Him and Devers, who's right over there, they did the first initial spike of this project. Kyle's not here, but he helped a lot with the deployments. Kristen's at the end of the table. She's our project lead. Dylan's not here, but he's our product manager. And then, yeah, and then Stephen Carter is over there, and he worked on this with all of us as well. So that's the team. And questions, and here's some resources. Here's the slides. And then there's links to the FastBoot, Ember FastBoot, the app server. And this presentation was typeset in my own CSS file called System Font IETNN, which you can click on. And there's a lot of really nice typesetting for international fonts. It's like artisanally handpicked ligatures and characters. So yeah, any questions?
I have a question. So in your case, like in the flow diagram that you showed,
Sure.
you had yeah, thank you. You have the FastBoot server runs, your API is what's talking to the FastBoot server. Do actual browsers also use the same Ember app, or is it only used for rendering these products? And is it different than the main Ember app that's for like the editor or whatever?
It's only it's an Ember app that only renders things for it.
But it does share a lot of components with the
Right, like add-ons or some.
So
Gotcha. Makes sense.
So stuff that does a lot of rendering of these components in the composer,
Yeah.
and stuff that's in common that gets rendered in FastBoot, we've broken that out into its own separate add-on.
Yep.
But then they both share.
Because I was gonna say, because I assume the editor is basically pre-render showing you what you're gonna see.
Yeah. So
To some extent.
the biggest chunk of that is called Ember Exclaim, which is that DSL, the JSON DSL for describing a template and binding data to it.
Mhm.
That's a big chunk of work that Dan Freeman also did. So, but that's the biggest chunk of shared code between the two.
So I've worked on apps a couple of times that used FastBoot, and one of the barriers that I had that I didn't really understand was not being able to use some popular UI add-ons within
Yes.
the app, like the nav bar and things like that.
Yep, this is another. I'd say this is another gotcha. I've run into that as well.
Yeah. Now I know you're sort of rendering static HTML here, but do you know any would you give any broad advice for someone who's trying to figure out how to navigate that? Because that ended up being the blocker for me, is I didn't want to redo all of the UI components.
Yeah. So my advice on navigating that is it's far easier to start a project knowing that you're going to use it in FastBoot, because every add-on you add to your project is essentially a liability. But beyond that, if you add an add-on that uses things like document query selector or document cookie or any of the traditional browser DOM APIs, those don't exist in FastBoot. Like, let's say they want to use Ajax, that doesn't exist in FastBoot either. So there's a lot of add-ons in the ecosystem that just assume that you're rendering in the browser, because that's what Ember always did. So there's a large selection of even some popular add-ons that up until recently made the assumption that they're operating in a browser environment with the browser DOM. So if you have a big existing app that's like even just a few years old, and you add FastBoot, you probably are going to run into problems where you're going to have to find the places that the browser DOM is invoked and then write conditional logic to guard against it. So what you can basically do is, like, let's say you have a component that does Ajax makes a request to ABC, and it just does something with Ajax. What you're going to have to do is either refactor Ajax to use like Ember Fetch, which works in FastBoot, or you'll have to do wrap this with if is FastBoot. Or you can say if not is FastBoot, then do this, else do something else.
Don't use an else with a not. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, there's like whiteboard stuff, but you're basically going to have to write some branching logic to do one thing in FastBoot land and do something else in not FastBoot land.
But just use Ember fetch in that case.
In this case, it's a bad example.
I
You
would
could
add
use
that
fetch.
in order to author components that are safe in FastBoot, there's a rule that's kind of been a rule for a long time in Ember that you can break and get away with more easily in the browser, but FastBoot brings it to the forefront. It is that you should only be manipulating DOM from very specific places, like the did insert element hook of a traditional Ember component. And as long as you do that, you will run fine in FastBoot, because FastBoot was designed to not run those hooks. So if you only ever try to fetch the DOM and did insert element, you would just fundamentally be FastBoot safe. Now, obviously, if you're not actively testing that, it's very easy to slip up and fetch the DOM from somewhere else, and that's going to get into problems.
Yeah.
But that is the design intent. And in terms of like the newer Octane APIs, same thing goes for like the new element modifiers that replace did insert element. They're intended to be things that don't boot in FastBoot.
So bad touch the DOM.
Yeah, touch the DOM in the few places where it's allowed. Yes. Exactly. Get consent before you touch the DOM. That's a good way to put it.
I'm not touching it.
Yeah, I took my own personal app that I'd been developing for 1.5 years and never thought about FastBoot, and I migrated it or made it work in FastBoot. But I did find a lot of cases where I was just making requests to the DOM, and it was actually pretty easy to refactor it in such a way that it was safe.
And I think most popular add-ons these days have at least heard of the concept, and a lot of the ones I've looked at that already dealt with mitigation. Like it's much better paved today now that like add-ons by default are tested about jQuery, for example, and like there's lots of things that we've sort of guided them along the path over time, and where they're much better than they were.
I do think the like rough edge of FastBoot is apps that want to serve different content to every user and use sessions to do that. That's like advanced mode FastBoot, and like it doesn't fit your use case. And there's actually a lot of use cases where that doesn't come up, and those are great. Like doing FastBoot on any kind of content sites where you're serving the same content to everybody is a tried and true path, and that makes caching easier and everything easier. You can pre-compute just like you do. But if you're talking about like rendering personalized content in FastBoot, you have to go much further and invest much more in infrastructure that can run FastBoot at low latency for every user and decide what to do about their sessions and all that stuff. And it's much more advanced use case.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing in a personal project, and it's a heavier lift.
Yeah,
for sure.
I have another question. Does anyone
Shoot.
else have questions before I keep asking?
Yeah, go for it.
So one of the other things that confused me about FastBoot, like this was a few years ago, was that it wasn't really clear to me what I was supposed to do on the hosting side of things. Like if I'm supposed to set up a totally different server on like a totally different cloud provider, or like do I need to configure something special? Like I wasn't actually sure where FastBoot fit in the deployment pipeline that I was using. When you worked on your personal project, like how did you actually, like what did your deployment story look like once you put FastBoot into the picture?
Well, I actually never deployed my personal project.
Oh, okay.
It's a bricolage, but I can give you an outline of how I would deploy it.
Okay.
I would deploy the FastBoot app server as like a Docker container on like probably Amazon or Google Cloud. It would be standalone. And then the Ember side would essentially be probably just pushed up to like S3. So the index HTML, the JSON, or the JS files, the CSS, and any of the images and stuff. And I think I would probably do them a little bit separated. So like essentially your dist assets would go up to the CEM, and then I would build a Docker image of the Ember FastBoot app, and that image would be run in Docker.
Okay.
So Yeah, I can talk to you more about that if you want.
There's lots of options. Like
You
you
can
can
do this,
deploy to Heroku. You can, like, if you already had lots of folks already have like an existing Express server set up for their own API, and you can like you wouldn't use FastBoot App Server in that case. You'd use FastBoot middleware, which just plugs in. It's just a middleware. It's just an Express middleware. Now, FastBoot App Server composes with the middleware part, but you know, it just depends on what you already have for deployment pipeline and how you're already working. But which is why it's different than like your average. Just deploy your static assets to somebody and good luck. It's totally different, but it's not. It's not that different than if you were deploying an API server, right? You have the same sets of problems. It's effectively the same thing. So obviously it does do stuff.
The way I was going to do it was just so. Let's see. I'm going to have FastBoot as one server. I have an Elixir like API server, and then I was going to have an Nginx, which would just segment the traffic off. So some of the requests would go here, and the request is basically API / and the request would go over here. There's would be basically 3 different Docker images that would all get pushed up as separate Docker images. Docker would provision them probably onto the same machine.
Okay.
So FastBoot would go here, and then separately, I would do the Ember build, and that stuff would go up to like Amazon S3. And that would just be the static JavaScript, CSS, index HTML. So
Depending on what you put in front of Nginx there, you could also just serve it with Nginx with static files too. If you put another cache layer in front of it.
there's a lot of ways to skin that cat.
Yeah, you
But don't skin an
can
actual
spend
cat.
infinite time on optimizing that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
A thing that people might not think about is that like Nginx as the front end of that layer is actually also a security factor, or at least an uptime factor, because I would never want to put a high traffic actual node process facing the internet. There's just a ton of things in the network stack that are easy to slow down, bog down, DOS, overwhelm. Like clients just deliberately reading back out their information slowly. And just like Nginx is battle hardened for that kind of thing. You always kind of want something like that in front of your real servers, especially node ones, which I don't trust nearly as much.
That's why I put it there.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you make requests, they're going to come into Nginx, which is its own HTTP server. You know, say, oh, you're requesting index HTML. I'll like come down here. You're requesting /API/users.json. You're going to go out here. So, Argo, you got a question?
No, I was.
You
just
said you would.
contemplating other ways to serve applications, but here's an actual question. Talk about first claim and how that pertains to security.
Does it just yell real loud?
What's that?
Does it yell really loud?
How does Ember explain?
It's
Sounds the alarm if you try to make that.
So the security in our use case, I mean, we control we control all the requests. So in theory, the user who's on the composer, like in our application, making changes to the templates, they can send explain data down here and like fuck with it. And then we're gonna send it along down here. So is that what you mean? Because we don't really do any validation.
Well, so what I was thinking of is this may not be evident for people who aren't familiar with it, but you might think that we could use handlebars templates for this rendering, that we could implement Ember components and render these layouts for our customers. And depending on how we architected things, maybe we could do that. But what is interesting to know about this library Ember explained, but it's kind of akin to HTML, in that it is this static declaration of a document, except it also acts kind of like a program, like an input for app. So rather than directly interacting with the DOM, you can take this JSON representation of layout, render, and components. So that part, Ron went over it fairly quickly, but that is one of the angles on the security on our server, in that even if a third party, an untrusted person can post this layout, given that it's declared and Ember explained, it is secure in a way that a handlebars template isn't. Like if you do the triple mustache handlebars,
Game
you
over.
don't want to run that on your server.
Right.
But
Yep.
You can do that with Exclaim because it must be valid JSON.
It's also a whitelist of the components that can be run. If you put arbitrary stuff in there, it's just not going to resolve to an Ember component and it won't render. So it's an additional layer.
Has anyone tried to host FastBoot on AWS Lambda?
I thought about that.
Mm.
Yeah, you've done it?
There are people that
Okay,
have done it.
I wonder if it works well.
Yeah.
It didn't when
probably
Lambda
not
first
that.
came out. They only supported a node version that FastBoot itself didn't support. I think 4, maybe 6. I don't know what version it was, but then they later added a bunch of other nodes versions. I mean,
I might try that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Cool.
That's serverless. Which just
I hate that term.
Which just means you don't have to think about the server. You just give them a function, and whenever people visit you for a URL, the function will run. And so, in theory, the function could just be all the FastBoot. Benefits are there's less for you to take care of, and pricing is very low compared to having a dedicated
So
server.
you pay per request, right? Yes.
Yeah, a number of Ember's public websites are FastBootified in that way because otherwise, like we would exceed our hosting sponsorship from like various companies that support Ember. So that's something the learning team ends up dealing with from time to time.
They actually use Lambda, or they're
No. I mean like the idea of having a serverless. So we're using
Yeah.
a serverless with a different provider. Backing, I think, the guides at the moment, but like just in general as a cost saving measure, that's been really helpful.
Cool.
I had one other question, Ron.
Yeah.
In your case, you didn't say it in the little flow diagram thing, but I assume that the actual this is the request from the editor to post to the API, and then a response about publishing is all async, right?
Yes.
Like that whole thing where it's going to FastBoot and back, and then posting to Amazon. That's all like worker jobs or something, right?
It's async, yeah. We have a little, so when they actually go to publish, that means they've done a bunch of editing, and they've sometimes different teams like go and review the content to make sure it looks good. When they hit the publish button, we have like a dialog that comes up, and you can select from a variety of publishers. So I'm going to publish to Amazon, Walmart, Target, whoever the retailer is. So they select the ones they want to publish to, and then we hit go. It starts, what is the animation, like a truck driving down the street or something? It says like delivering the content or something.
That's
I don't
great.
know.
That's great.
Hey, yeah, it's a truck
great.
that has enhanced content on the back. It's great. And it has like a little timer, not a timer, but it has a async thing. So when the server comes back, it doesn't actually have to do all of this and wait for the result to come
Right.
back.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
But yeah, it's async.
Makes sense.
So what actually happens? It's a good question because what happens is if you see, thanks, Tom. So this composer, they're editing like any number of these products.
Could be hundreds, thousands.
Could be
whatever.
hundreds of products. So in that sequence diagram, we make posts of FastBoot multiple times for every product.
Right.
Multiple times per product.
One product gets one request, I assume.
Yeah. So we basically go and we say publish. API says how many products are you publishing for? So if we say like 50, make 50 requests to FastBoot.
Are considered batching that. I mean, I guess if it's fast enough, what does it matter?
It's so fast that we don't need to worry about it.
Fast boot.
It's all those. It's those 8 shoes.
Yeah.
Plus 8 speed.
I mean, I just assumed it was like delayed job or some sidekick or some background processing thing, and just like churning through
So right now we just churn through them all and hit it. We just
in the
hammer.
server process,
We just
and you
hammer
don't time out the request.
It isn't a delayed job process.
It is a delayed job.
They're not delayed.
So we do have an architecture diagram that's far more complicated than this.
No, this is great. I know it seems like I'm nitpicking it. I'm just curious how it works.
Where right in the middle you have like a message queue.
Yeah.
And then you post it to the queue, and then the queue will process
Right.
it and batch them off.
Yep.
And then if it fails, it'll like do extra. Something exponential backup. Couldn't
Yeah.
say it because I have food in my mouth. That's why.
Sure.
Any other questions? Cool.
All right. Thank you, Ron. Okay. Can you pull the slides back up? If you don't mind, yes. I don't even remember what I put here. Okay. So I want to take a little bit of time after this. Well, I don't want to go to the next slide yet. Oh, wait a moment here, I guess. I have a couple questions for this group about some topics and things you'd like to see coming up in the future. I also wanted to just give a quick explanation of if you've heard of Ember Octane happening, what that is and like what stage it's at and all that sort of thing, and give people the opportunity to ask some questions. And then we have raffle prizes. So on the topic of Octane, who here has heard of Ember Octane? Everybody in the room. Great.
Not everybody.
Not me.
Oh, no. Great.
Not everybody.
Out of the loop.
Oh, great. Okay, so I'll give it an explanation as well for the internet. So Ember Octane is something that is upcoming in Ember. It's I don't know. I don't have a good one-liner in my head yet, but basically at EmberConf this past spring, we talked a lot about it during the keynote, and essentially there have been a lot of features that have shipped recently in Octane or in Ember, as well as some upcoming releases that together form a cohesive programming model that makes using Ember a little bit different than you're used to as a developer in the past. So for example, using native JavaScript classes, some improvements to templates, using some of the lessons that were learned from the Glimmer project and bringing those into Ember. And so if someone is working on an app today and someday in the future, once all of those features are together in one Ember release, like as a complete whole, you could not use any of them and keep upgrading your app and like truck along with whatever features you're used to, or you could start adopting those features incrementally and kind of walk towards this different way of building Ember apps. So it's like a thing that's been very long in the making to bring all of these features together, and Octane is kind of the name that it we'll use to refer to it once all of those features are together and the documentation's there to support it and things like that. Anything to add to that, like verbal description of what it will be once it's released?
No, I think the important parts, at least to me, and I'm sure everyone has different takeaway, but the important parts to me are that the features are shipping in current stable releases the whole time, and when the whole set is ready, that's when we have this big like ready to go. Okay, everyone should
like
pay attention.
Stamp on it.
You could have used them like when they released, and it was totally fine. That's public API and fully supported. But it's a good point in time when we do the Octane release. It's a good point in time for folks that don't really care about what happens in individual 6-week release cycles, but now they can poke their heads up and pay attention and hopefully be happy with the changes that we made.
Yeah. So right now it's in a preview period. Oh, yes.
We should add the word addition.
Addition. Oh, yes, the word
The reason-
addition.
The hope is that Octane is, the reason we're doing Octane, we're calling it the first edition of Ember. And we needed something different than releases because our release pipeline is actually like a pretty well-oiled machine at this point. I mean, the machine's sitting over here. And, every 6 weeks, new features are landing, and they're backward compatible. And so, we don't do a big like 4.0, look at our new features thing, because that's actually not the point. Like we keep shipping features continually without breaking things, and so the release numbers are very poor here. So we needed a way to communicate to people that we've reached a new level of functionality that actually works really well together. And so we said, let's call that an addition.
Right.
As distinct from
And to
release.
complicate things, like many projects would just say, we'll have a major version, and that'll be like this big ta-da, where we delete all the old stuff and add a bunch of new stuff. But we have, yes, every 6 months, though, right? But the thing for us is that our major versions only remove previously deprecated code, and anything that was not deprecated in the prior minor version will still work in the next major version. So we don't have the same opportunity for that like big bang. Okay, let's sweep all the garbage under the rug. Good luck upgrading. Ha ha ha.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah.
But that's good for
So
everyone
that's
that
why-
uses Ember.
So that's the explanation. We're calling it an addition, and the hope is that it goes well, and we do another addition after that.
Yep.
And we name names for them. And people want some non-fossil fuel-oriented names.
Yes, can confirm.
Yeah, I want like solar, geothermal.
No,
Ember geothermal,
no,
please.
no energy related.
Yeah, so the other piece I'll add is that there is a preview of Octane, meaning that the features that are available in stable releases, as well as a couple other things, are part of like a blueprint if people want to take it for a test drive. However, if someone's like, should I upgrade to Octane? Really what I would recommend doing is take a look at the Ember features that shipped in regular stable Ember releases and start thinking about what it would look like to start using them, or like update some of your old code that like no one's touched in a long time to use things that are already available in stable releases.
Yeah,
of Ember
or even
today.
just start using the new like native classes or angle bracket invocation for new components, or like as you author new things.
Yep.
Right? Just gradually get your feet wet. That kind of thing.
So that's the what is Octane. Does anyone have any questions about it?
Why Octane is a name?
I don't know. You're gonna have to ask Tom. I would have called it geothermal.
Basically just partially answered this, but to reiterate, sounds like there's no reason for people to hold their breath until officially Octane.
Correct.
Mhm.
You could-
That's exactly the point.
If
Yes.
you have
Yep.
a reason, like if you'd like to upgrade to 10,
To get-
you should go ahead and do that.
Yes.
And not wait.
Yes, you should totally stay on the current release or current LTS, depending on what your flavor is. Like some folks like to stay on the LTS release versus the current release. But
310 was pretty great.
What's that?
Yeah, 310 was good.
Is great. Yes, it's still the current release. It is still the current release. Exactly. There's no reason to wait for a thing. It's like already shipping. You've already got all the features except for one that will be in Octane are in 3.11. So the only two that aren't in 3.10 that are going to be in 3.11 are the on modifier and the FN helper. However, there are polyfills for those things that work back to Ember 2.12. So,
Ooh.
and yeah, so you can basically use all the features. The only feature that isn't available without using like Canary master versions of Ember, which is pretty risky for those that actually care about things shipping, is the tracked feature. That's like, it just took a little while to get right, and we've got it right now on master. I think we're actually really happy with the current state. But the current master will become the next LTS release, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to land a giant feature just before you cut an LTS. So we're going to hold until the LTS branch is out, and then we can go on shipping. So sometime 3.13 or later will be likely the final Octane release. But yeah, that's a great point. Totally.
Any other questions?
The compatibility range look like for Glimmer component? What versions of
Glimmer component works back to 3.4. However, you also will want, in 3.4, you'll want the modifier polyfill. So you can have on, and you'll want FN, because that's a big part of the Glimmer component programming model. Those polyfills work back to 2.12. One is 2.10, and one is 2.12, just 2.12.
I don't know how you keep this up in your head anyway.
The other issue is that
Tables.
tracked isn't the thing today, nor back to 3.4. However, you can use the native decorators if you're using 3.10 or higher, or you can use Ember decorators, the add-on, if you're using older ones, and then you'd be using @computed instead of the tracked model, which you lose a little bit of the niceness of Glimmer components. Like you can't just do regular assignments; you have to still use Ember.set or this this.set in Ember component, or Glimmer component. But by and large, things work. They work well, and there isn't an issue. There's not a giant difference between the spike that I had done in Sparkle's component to what we ended up going on in Glimmer component. There's a slight shifting of the argument order to the constructor. That's basically the only fundamental difference, and that works back to 3.4 as well. So.
Is there going to be a 1.0 release of the Glimmer component package?
Yes, before we ship the Octane blueprint, there will be a 1.0. Because right now I think we're using 0.14 something alpha or something like that in the blueprint. Yeah, they're just numbers though. Don't worry. The main blocker there is that right now, if you're using a Glimmer.js app, you would still use the @Glimmer/component package. However, you're getting a different set of TypeScript, JavaScript, whatever. So the thing that you get in Ember apps is slightly different. The types are different, and we want to fix that before we do the final release. There's not a big blocker. It's just that Glimmer.js, the other framework, doesn't have modifiers yet. So like Glimmer, when you use that Glimmer component in a Glimmer.js app, you have to have something with access to the DOM, or you're doing random document query selector shenanigans, which is horrible. So there's still some hooks in that side for like essentially did insert element E things. It's not that, but it's like that. And those will go away once the work is to add modifiers to that, and then you have on and FN's a helper, but on and like the did insert, those add Ember/render modifiers will work there, that kind of thing. That's the rough gist. But I don't know. I'm not saying that 1.0 is gated on having those unified. That's just what I want. So we may do 1.0 with the current state and then just iterate as well. Because it's not a breaking change to Ember users, it's a theoretical breaking change to Glimmer.js users. So we'll figure that out. I don't. Where's numbers and features are hard.
Cool. So if anyone else comes up with any other questions as you're trying out Ember's current features, or you're kind of like wondering what's going on, Ember Discord is a good place to come ask those questions. You can find the link there, as well as following along on the Times and other newsletters. Okay, so actually, I think I'll just go ahead and say as well, if anyone else is hiring and wants to give a shout out to positions they're hiring for, this is a good time. Third Iron, let me know that they're hiring. So Carl is someone who's come to this meetup a whole bunch and wasn't here tonight because he went to TypeScript. I know, right? So anyway, they're hiring. Their company is called Third Iron. And so check them out if you're looking for a number job. Does anyone else have any jobs openings they want to share?
Is anyone here actually even looking for it?
It's a big internet. Watch it.
I also, yes,
Oh,
the
that's true.
internet.
internet.
Actually, this meetup actually gets reasonable
Cool.
async.
Hello, people on the
Yes,
internet.
people on the internet.
Make sure you tweet at Jen Weber when you watch, and that way we'll know what the delay is. Everyone.
Well, some of it's going to be delayed. It'll be like tomorrow because they're sleeping. Our friends
Exactly.
in the-
That's what I mean. I don't mean like now. It
Across
could be
the
weeks
ocean.
later.
Oh yeah,
It could be
that
months
too.
later.
That too.
Sleep when you're dead.
In 5 years, still feel free. Ping.
Yeah,
Ron
still
Taylor.
feel free. Ping me long after the fact.
Not me though.
All right, so I'm gonna stop our broadcast here. Anyone who joined us online, thanks so much. Bye. Bye.